Hi guys, my name's Chris Hughes. I'm a dietitian who has a special interest in chronic disease, so specifically diabetes, heart disease, and weight loss. And so I put this together just to give you some of the tools and knowledge about how to most effectively manage someone with diabetes and to bring those sugars down. So I've put together a bit of a slide. Now, if you have any questions, my email is at the back, or we can arrange a time for me to jump on and answer any questions as well. All right. So first thing is, and this is the basics that I try and get across to my clients, is it's important to first have an understanding of which foods have carbohydrates, okay? These are the foods that have the potential to increase your sugar in the blood glucose levels. So it comes from carbohydrates. It's not just sugar. Like a lot of people might just look at sugar on a label, but it's the carbohydrates that convert into sugar. So rice is really, really high in carbohydrate, but it's got bugger all sugar in it. And it's one of the most damaging to the blood because we can eat a lot of it. And so the first step is always get an understanding of which foods have carbs. Now, it doesn't mean that these foods are no good for you. What it comes down to is the amount of these foods that is eaten at any one point in time. So if you eat one banana, then it's likely to have very little impact on your sugars. If you're a diabetic, okay, it will certainly send the sugars up a little bit, but that's okay. We need the sugars to go up a bit. It's a reflection that there's some energy in the blood. The problem is when it goes too high, okay, and that would be a situation where you might have 2 bananas, a thing of grapes, and a big thing of watermelon, and you're eating it all at the one time. So the body just can't cope with that amount of carb at any one time. So the sugars are going to spike. Okay, so if you look at this table here, we've got all the dairy foods that have got carbohydrates. So primarily, we're looking at milk and yogurt there, and of course, ice cream, custard. Butter doesn't, cheese doesn't have a lot, but it's mostly those ones that are listed there. Most of your fruits have got carbohydrates. The amounts vary. Strawberries are fairly low in carbohydrates, so of a fruit that's a good one to snack on, strawberries would be my pick. Most veggies do not have carbs. It's only these starchier veggies like sweet potato, corn, and then things like legumes and baked beans and kidney beans. Now, all of these are really healthy foods, but if you're a diabetic, you've got to be cautious of the amount that you eat. Your cereals and grains, so these are your biscuits, your bread, your cereals, rice, pasta. These guys are really high in carbohydrate. You've got to be particularly conscious of how much of them you're eating. And then, the ones at the bottom are your sweets and your takeaway sort of food like chips and chocolate, soft drink. Most people are aware that these impact on the sugars in some way. So the way I want you to think about these foods is that think about carbohydrates is like it's a long chain, okay? So carbohydrates are essentially a long chain made up of sugars, and specifically I want you to think about the sugar link in these chains as glucose, because that's what it breaks down into, and that's what actually rises in the blood. So when you're pricking someone's finger or pricking your own finger to check your sugars, you're checking your blood glucose level, and the glucose are the links in these carbohydrate chains. Now, eating carbs, what actually happens? I'm actually going to try and draw this out for you, okay? So bear with me for a moment, but let's say, and hopefully this is a dark enough color, but we'll see how we go. So let's say you eat a piece of bread, okay? In that bread, it's got a chain of carbohydrates, right? So it goes down here into the stomach, and it's into the stomach, it's full of acid, it starts to digest, and it breaks that chain down into the individual links of glucose. Okay, and so from there, it goes into the small intestine and it's absorbed into the blood, and it's then pumped all around the body. Okay, so it goes to all the muscles, to your brain and everywhere else, and it's there to give these organs and these tissues energy. Okay, glucose gives energy. So it's okay the fact that it's in the blood. The problem is that it's staying in the blood too long and builds up. Okay, so normally how it would get from the blood into the muscle, for example, is insulin. Okay, so in response to eating some carbohydrate, it's digested into glucose. So that happens in the stomach, small intestine. That then goes into the blood. Okay, so the sugars start to come up in the blood. The pancreas then senses it, right? So the pancreas can tell that we've eaten a piece of bread, and it'll start to produce insulin, and insulin is then pumped into the blood. So it basically, with the glucose, is carried around the body, okay, glucose and insulin. And insulin's job is then to unlock those muscle cells, okay? So it unlocks the muscle cells and it lets the glucose in to give energy. So if we go back there, you'll see, I'll go back to drawing. You'll see that the glucose goes around the body to the muscle, and then we have insulin which is produced here in the pancreas, and it follows the glucose around and it just unlocks that muscle and lets it in. Now, the problem with diabetes is twofold, okay? So initially, it's that the lock is defective. It's not unlocking. So insulin's not unlocking the muscle cells effectively as it once did. And then also we can be a little bit low on insulin. So we're not producing enough insulin. And it tends to be a combination of the two. And the longer you've had diabetes, the lower your levels of insulin get. And that's where people then need insulin. The outcome is all the same, okay? So if the sugar, if the insulin isn't unlocking the cell, or you're running out of insulin, or a combination of the two, then what we run into is a situation where the glucose is building up in the blood. Okay, so normally the insulin's unlocking the cell, but it's not. So the glucose has to stay in the blood. And this is like the blood turns to syrup, is the way I get people to visualize it. Okay, if that sugar is staying in the blood, it's just going to build up and the blood's going to get thicker. There's a lot of resistance. The heart has to pump this thick, sticky blood around the body. And that's where we really run into the complications, okay? So when you prick your finger and it's up in double digits or more, or even worse, if the meter's reading high, it's showing you that you've got really high levels of sugar in the blood, really high levels of glucose, that is, and the blood's thick and sticky. So the impact of that short term is that you get really thirsty, okay? The body's trying to get rid of all the sugar, so it's peeing it out, and that makes you really thirsty. You're peeing all the time, so you're needing to go to the toilet all the time. You're really tired all the time, you're really fatigued, which can sound confusing because you've got the sugar in the blood. You would think, well, we've got all this energy in the blood, why do I feel tired? It's because it's not getting into the cells to give you the energy, and that's the problem. You get blurred vision. Okay, so vision can be a thing that really plays up, and you're seeing double or triple of everything. And then infections and wounds just do not heal that well. So you're really at a risk of increased infections, and that's a problem. And so all of these are short-term impacts. Longer term, we run into amputations. If someone's got really poor circulation, their wounds aren't healing, then that's where we start to see that they might need to lose a toe or a foot or a leg, and it just gets worse and worse. Heart disease risk, it just increases exponentially because your heart has to pump all this thick, sticky blood around the body, but also the arteries that feed the heart become blocked. You've got the sticky substance. So if you compare that with a diet that is really high in saturated fat as well, then you get an increase in these blockages. And most people with diabetes die of heart disease. So this is a really big concern. Your vision deteriorates significantly. It's not just that short-term blur. The long-term, you're doing some damage there. For men, erectile dysfunction is a big one, and this is an important one for men because it's probably one of the only ways I can get men to listen. It's like they're not as bothered by the heart or the eyes or the kidneys. They're bothered by the fact that they get erectile dysfunction, and then all of a sudden they're listening. And this is an important one because circulation is not that good. Blood's too thick and sticky, and all these parts of the body have finer circulation. And then the other one is kidneys, and that's one that we see. I'm working in a kidney team at the moment, and we see a lot of the damage that's done to the kidneys from high sugars. This all impacts significantly on quality of life. You can talk about people, changing their diet, and they need to have quality of life and be able to eat what they want. This impacts on quality of life more than anything else. If you're dealing with really high sugars all the time, you feel horrible. It's not a good way to live. And so fortunately, we can change it. Now, medications are one way. Okay, medications are very effective. You've got medications such as insulin, which is helping to actually just replace what the body should be producing. But then you've got medications that help the body respond to insulin, or to encourage the pancreas to produce more insulin, or for you to pee out extra glucose through the urine. So there's all these medications on the market that are fantastic to help manage the sugar. But the key thing to remember is all of them are there to manage the carbohydrate that you put into your body in the first place. Okay, so we can obviously, I'm not saying get rid of medication, but we can decrease the reliance or further improve our sugars by changing the amount of carb that we're eating. Okay, so that is a really important concept that sometimes might seem a stretch too far, but changing some diet, and I'll show you why, isn't that difficult, and there's this flavor of some ways of actually doing it that people can get used to. Now, we do have things like high and low GI carbohydrates. Okay, so most people may have heard of this, and quite often it'll come to mind when you're thinking of like mixed grain bread versus white bread, or you might be thinking of white rice and like a basmati or whole grain rice. The way to think about this is how I describe carbohydrates as a long chain. The low GI are carbs that are typically it's a chain that's harder to break down. So it's like the chain's made of steel, right? So that means the sugar that once it's digested, it's taking longer to digest. So the sugar goes into the blood slower. Whereas the high GI, it's like it's made of paper. It just dissolves instantly, and then boom, we get this big rush of sugar that goes into the blood, and we get a spike. Now, the key thing to remember here is the amount of carb is the same. They're virtually the same amount of carb. It's just that one has to enter the blood slower, one hits real quickly and then can drop just as quick. So the low GI is certainly the best option over the high GI, but more effective again is actually reducing the amount of carbohydrate in the diet. Okay, so a lower carb diet. Now, I'm not saying carb free, but a lower carb diet is going to bring the sugars down more effectively than anything else. It is really important. So I'm going to give you a few examples here, okay? I'm keeping this talk really broad. It's not specific to anyone, but this is a typical sort of client that I might see. And it's important to sort of have this understanding because, this is where it becomes individualized, and I can sort of help people, customized ways of helping, their diet and lifestyle with it. But having some sort of numbers while I'm explaining this is an important concept, so you can help to really grasp what I'm talking about. So the example will be a male. He's about 40 years old. He's type 2, really high sugars, BMI about 40. Okay, so yes, BMI has limitations, but when your BMI is up around 40, then it is telling us that we need to lose weight, and that's not an easy thing. And if you're interested, I can give you a talk on weight loss and just the intricacies around that as well. But for now, we'll focus on diabetes. So we typically will have nutrition targets for someone. Okay, so for our client here, they do need to lose weight. Now, I'll put the kilojoules or calories, depends on what you want to talk in. I'll put them in here, but I'm not going to talk about them in depth. But I'm giving you a few food examples. So having these sort of background goals is just helpful when I'm talking about the examples, but I'll focus on the carb concept here. The carbs are going to reduce the sugars. The kilojoules calories are what drops the body fat level. Okay, so that's another talk altogether. But for the sake of this client that we're talking about, he might need 6,000 kilojoules to lose weight, which is about 1,500 calories. So he might maintain at about 9,000, but to lose it, we've got to eat less kilojoules. So we would aim for about 6,000 kilojoules a day. Now it's nothing more than a guide, but it helps you when I show you these next food examples. Now, carbohydrate-wise, anyone with type 2, I try and keep their carbs at around 30 grams per meal. I don't really want them that high. Okay, so 30 grams a meal is a good amount. You get a good amount of carbohydrate in there, but it's not too high for the body to deal with, and then your body can handle that amount of carb over time. So typically we're talking about 30 grams per main meal, and if it was a snack, it might be about 15 grams. Now, some meals you'll be over a bit, and that's not a huge problem, but as a whole, it helps to have this number when you're trying to learn about the food and putting it together. Now, the other thing, which I'm not going to go into depth here, but when I put a meal plan together, I'm looking for plenty of fiber. I typically want good sources of magnesium, vitamin C and zinc, and that's because they actually help the body respond to insulin. So they're a really good one to include because they improve the way that the body can handle carbohydrates. And then I also want plenty of color. And so what I mean by that is lots of vegetables, certain fruits, or fruits certainly included, but be conscious of the amount you eat at any one meal, and then plenty of salad. And the reason we do this is there's heaps of anti-inflammatory properties in a lot of these foods. And, poorly controlled diabetes is really inflammatory to the body. So if we can decrease that inflammatory process, then it's going to have better long-term outcomes. Okay, so this is a little diagram that I'm going to attempt to explain. And I'll draw on this one as well. I'll see how I go. I won't do it. I'll do it in white. No, I'll do it in black. I'll see how that looks. Make it reasonably thick. Okay, so what we've got here, if you can see right down the bottom, I've just got a typical day. It might include a breakfast, a snack, a lunch, a snack, and dinner. Okay, now on the side here, we've got the blood glucose levels going up. over time, okay? So over the day, they're going to go up and come back down, and, you know, that's how the cycle works. So let's say at breakfast, someone has a couple bits of toast. So 2 bits of toast has 30 grams of carb in total, but then they have like a boiled egg, a couple of eggs, and they might have some fried tomato, which don't have carbs. Okay, so the sugars are going to go up a bit, but not too high, because 30 grams is pretty good. So the fact that it's going up is not the problem. We need a bit of glucose in the blood that gives you energy, okay? We don't want to be too low, and that can happen if someone's not eating enough carb and they're on insulin or big doses of insulin. So it's always, whenever we're making changes in someone's diet, it's really important that we're monitoring their blood glucose levels. But typically around 30 grams would see you pretty safe. And then it'll come back down. And then they might have a piece of fruit at morning tea. They might have a wrap at lunchtime with some meat and salad, and it's similar in carb to the sandwich. They might have boiled egg and some nuts in the afternoon, and that's not going to affect their sugars at all because there's no carbohydrates. And then dinner, they might have some meat, let's say some vegetables, but there's only one starchy veg, which might be a small potato, and their sugars might go like that. And that's a pretty good outcome, right? We're keeping them within range. So even though the body's not handling carbs overly well, we're not putting too much in there for the body to deal with. Now, what can happen with diabetes? And let me go through these next few slides, and I'll show you the response. So up in that high area, by the way, is where the sugar turns to syrup. I say that it doesn't really turn to syrup, but the consistency of it, you can think about like that. It's thick and sticky, and that's where we run into the issues, okay? So we're trying to avoid those highs at all costs. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. So this is a breakfast, okay? It's a common breakfast. Hopefully you can see that I might see. This person's having like 6 Wheat Bix, cup of milk, and a couple of tablespoons of sugar. Now, remembering, we want this client to have about 30 grams of carbohydrate per meal. You know, much above that, and it gets harder and harder to measure the sugar, and the higher you go, the harder it gets. Now, there's in this meal 6 Wheat Bix, a cup of milk, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. We've also got about 2,600 odd kilojoules. And remember, we're aiming for 6,000 in a day. So that's eating up a good third or more, a little over a third of the target we're aiming for, which means the rest of the day would have to be a lot leaner if you wanted them to lose weight. So what you would likely see here at 109 grams of carbohydrate, I'll just go back a step, is you'd be looking pretty quickly at a response like that. We're already up into the highs there, okay? So that's a problem. Now, I don't think I can disappear from that. No, yeah. So, oops. So yeah, so that this person would have high sugars, immediately after breakfast. Okay, and then we're going to go on to the next meal. They go out and they might have some fish and chips. Okay, so they've gone out for lunch. I've ignored any snacks just for time here, but they go out for lunch and they have a piece of battered fish or crumb fish, and they have medium-sized chips. Well, there's 106 grams of carb in that. So again, we're going to see this spike. They probably haven't gone down. They haven't probably gone down overly much since breakfast. So they're sitting up in that high area. The blood's nice, thick, sticky. So it's really problematic. Then they go and top it up with something. Now, this doesn't include a soft drink. If I put a soft drink in there, we're north of 150 grams of carb and, into the 6,000 kilojoules. So our target kilojoule-wise to help them lose weight is eaten up in one meal. And the amount of carbohydrate is just off the chart. Now, I need to really emphasize here, if this happens once or twice a week maximum, it's not a problem, okay? The damage for diabetes is done with the exposure, the time of exposure. If someone's sitting up with sticky blood all the time, that's when they run into issues, okay? I have eaten this meal plenty of times. I do not pretend to have a perfect diet. I would never expect anyone to have a perfect diet. You can eat these kind of meals, not a problem, if they're 1 or 2 meals out of a potential 30 odd meals most people have a week, okay? It's not the 1 or 2 that do the damage, it's the bulk of them. So when I am giving this example, I'm not saying someone can never eat this and their quality of life would be affected if they couldn't eat this, because that's not realistic, okay? But if they're eating this regularly enough in combination with other really high carb foods and their sugars are never coming down, then we're putting them in the grave early, and we're actually affecting their quality of life because they're going to feel like shit all the time. All right, so I'll move on to dinner, right? So let's say they had dinner. We're going to talk about a frozen pizza. Okay, so someone and I have comfortably. I'm using a man here. I've eaten a whole pizza, not a problem at all. So a man of reasonable size, if their BMI is up around 40, they could easily put a pizza away, no problem. It's only 500 grams, right? So this meal has 138 grams of carb, and again, most of the kilojoules are eaten up in one meal. So if we're trying to get this person to lose weight, we're going nowhere. We've doubled what we're trying to get them to get by this time, okay? So what we've seen then in terms of the sugar, if I can go back, we've seen something like this. They've basically shot up straight away. They will have struggled to have come down, and I'm excluding if they've eaten anything at morning tea here, and they'll be up here. Afternoon tea, they might go down a bit depending on what they're doing physically, and now their meter is reading high. They're off the chart here, and they're needing to pee all the time, and they're really thirsty. And this is a danger zone, and if we leave someone up here all the time, then it's really problematic. So yeah, I'm going to go through to one other dinner comparison, okay, because this is one that I see quite commonly. This is 2 cups of cooked rice, and whether this is brown rice or whole grain or basmati, which is a good lower GI, the amount of carb in it is still pretty much the same. There's not much difference, okay? So yes, if this was basmati, it's going to break down slower, but it's still going to give a huge glucose response, and someone's going to struggle to bring this down. So this is 2 cups of stew, big ton of rice. We're talking about 154 grams of carb. Now, the other issue here is this meal is likely to be eaten at night time. Okay, so whoever's eating this, they're about to go to bed and not move for 8 hours potentially, or not move much, right? So normally movement helps to pull the sugar out of the blood into the muscle. And this is why exercise is so effective, because it bypasses that need for insulin. It pulls it into the muscle without needing insulin. But if you have this meal and then go to sleep, your heart's got to pump syrup for the next 10 hours. Your sugars are going to stay away all night. And that's a problem. And you're just going to be needing to throw more and more insulin at the problem without addressing the actual root cause, which is the food. So a comparison I want to show you here, okay, is something like cauliflower rice. Right now, I know this is not everyone's cup of tea, and I know that it may not be someone's most favorite meal, but when you think about rice, the carbs in that previous meal is in the rice. It's not in the stew. It's primarily in the rice. There's a little bit in the stew depending on the veggies you put in, but it's primarily in the rice. And so what does rice do? Well, it's there to absorb flavor of whatever you're cooking it with, okay? It doesn't have a strong flavor. There is a texture for sure. There's a mouthfeel to it, and that can't be ignored. But if you use something like cauliflower rice, which has got virtually zero carb in it, then it's there to absorb the flavor. It doesn't have a strong flavor, but it'll take on whatever the other flavor is. Now, if this is a stretch too far, you can do 50-50. You can do a cup of rice and a cup of cauliflower rice. Yes, the sugars are still going to go up, but they're not going to go anywhere near as high as what it would previously. And this is going to see an improvement in sugars quite significantly. And if you can go totally to full cauliflower rice, then your sugars are going to drop. You're going to need less insulin, and you're going to be less thirsty and less tired, and less, your infections are going to heal better. So, as much as you can encourage this to really help how someone's feeling, the better that person will be. Now, what I've done is I've put in 2 cups of cauliflower rice, the equivalent of the normal rice. So this is still the same size meal. This person isn't going hungry. Okay, so they're still eating a large size meal. There's 18 grams of carbohydrate in that meal. Okay, and only under 1,800 kilojoules. So it's going to be more conducive to them losing weight as well. So these are worth considering and worth trialing. If someone's not exposed to this in the first place, how can they even make a decision? We're not giving them choice. So you've got to really offer these things to help with that choice. And sometimes change can be hard, but I think if you've got a good support network around you, then it can be done. All right. Now, which foods don't have carbs? And I am nearly finished, okay? So which foods don't have carbs? Well, these guys here, and I can send this through to anyone that wants it, but most of your veggies and salads don't have a lot of carbs. Now, these are little to no carbs. It's not that they're carb-free, but they're little to no carb. So if you're cooking up a stew or a curry or a casserole, and when you think of a lot of the dishes that we eat, there's some sort of protein and vegetable or salad. So a stir fry is meat and veg, a curry is meat and veg, a stew is meat and veg. If we use the veg that are lower carb than the meat, you've got a meal that's still really low in carbohydrate. You can eat a big portion of it. And, coincidentally, it's also really low in kilojoules, so it can help you lose weight. So, a good lean protein source, lots of veggies in it, and then just be cautious with what you're going to use. Preferably you use the cauliflower rice. That's going to bring the sugars right down. Now, if you're looking for something for breakfast, it might be a couple of bits of toast. They're okay to eat 2 bits of toast, but it's then what you're putting with it. So you'd want someone to then have some egg and, always put colour. The colour is really important. So you might have an egg and then some fried tomato and onion, and then that's a pretty good meal. Lunches might be a sandwich or it might be a salad and meat, but there's ways that you can put meals together with just thinking outside the box. Now, there are a heap of good low-carb products on the market. The more the demand increases, the better the market comes to meet them. And so now we've got the cauliflower rice. Now, you don't need to go and buy this. You can just put normal cauliflower in a blender. But like everything, there's a convenience option, and this is 100% cauliflower. They've just blended it, they put it in a packet and freeze it and sell it to you. It's nice and easy to cook. You microwave it for 5 minutes. I like to throw a tablespoon of garlic, minced garlic in there and add some good flavour, and it's quite nice. This is a pasta for anyone that likes pasta, really low in carb, high in fibre, high in protein, gluten-free, so it's a really good option, and it's the closest thing to real pasta. It's actually got a reasonable taste to it. Nothing's the exact same, but it's a fairly good comparison. There's sugar-free soft drinks. Now, this is a naturally sweetened rather than an artificially sweetened, which will always be a better option. Doesn't have the impact on the gut that the artificially sweetened ones do. Now, the question about that I often get is, what about artificial sweeteners? Yes, they're problematic to the gut health, to our gut health, but so is sugar. Sugar does the exact same thing. So you are better with a diet soft drink that's artificially sweetened rather than the full strength. The best is always water. Like I would never ever, that will never be taken off the perch from number one. But these naturally sweetened ones are a good option as well. And then there's actually good breads on the market. So these guys, in 2 bits of bread, there's typically 30 grams of carb. And 2 bits of this bread, which you can get at Woolworths, is 4 grams of carbs. So it doesn't really affect your sugar at all. And it's high fiber. It's got as much protein as meat in it. And it's a really good source actually for the heart as well. So there's some great breads out there on the market. There's some wraps, which are fairly similar. These are fairly low in carb. There's strawberries. As I said earlier, strawberries are one of the lowest carb fruits that are out there. Tins of tuna and salmon and sardines. These are nice snacks that are good lean protein sources that don't have carb, because meat doesn't have carb. And then there's some yogurts. The YoPro or the Chobani Fit, has to be Chobani Fit, are both low carb yogurts, so fairly low carb. So they're a good option for snacks, or you might have it with some breakfast. All right, guys, that's me. If you do have questions, you can email me there at chris@mealsy.com. I'm happy if you've got like a staff meeting, I can jump on and answer any questions that you may have. And if you're interested in any other talks, you can let me know. I can put something together for you as well. Thanks.